You pick up your phone. You didn't decide to. It just happened. Somewhere between one thought and the next, your thumb was already unlocking the screen, already scrolling, already looking for something, anything, to fill the 2 seconds of silence that just opened up in your brain. That silence, that's boredom, and you cannot sit in it. Nobody can anymore. Here's the strange part. For 300,000 years, humans had no phones, no books, no music on demand, no conversations waiting in their pocket. And yet there is almost no evidence, none, that ancient humans experienced boredom the way you experience it today. Not as a psychological condition, not as something to escape. So what did they have that you don't? Let's start with the research that broke this open. In 2014, psychologists at the University of Virginia ran an experiment that became infamous. They put people alone in a room with nothing to do but their own thoughts. No phone, no book, just a chair and a button that delivered a mild electric shock. Within 15 minutes, a quarter of the participants, people who had earlier said they'd pay money to avoid being shocked, voluntarily shocked themselves, just to have something happen, anything. The silence was worse than the pain.
That's the modern brain. Now here's the ancient one. Anthropologists studying the Hadza, the San, the Aché, groups still living close to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, have documented something almost the opposite. Long stretches of stillness, sitting, watching, doing nothing that looks, to a modern observer, like anything at all. And no distress, no fidgeting for a device that isn't there, just presence. So what's the difference? It isn't willpower, it's wiring. Boredom, psychologists now argue, isn't the absence of stimulation. It's the gap between the stimulation your brain expects and what it's actually getting. And that expectation is trained. Every notification, every autoplay, every infinite scroll teaches your brain to expect a constant, rising drip of novelty. Once that becomes the baseline, anything slower than that feels unbearable. Silence stops feeling like rest. It starts feeling like a threat. Ancient humans never trained that expectation. Their world simply didn't deliver novelty on demand, so their brains never learned to crave it on demand. Let's reconstruct what stillness actually looked like for them. Midday. The hunt is done, or it isn't happening today. There's no next task queued up, no notification pulling attention forward. A woman sits at the edge of camp, running her fingers along a hide, not really working it, just holding it. A man watches smoke rise from the fire and doesn't look away. Children nearby, half playing, half not. Nobody fills the silence. Nobody feels the need to. Anthropologist Marshall Salins called hunter-gatherer societies the original affluent society, not because they had more, but because they wanted less. Their minds weren't running a constant background process of, what should I be doing right now? There was no right now to optimize. There was just now. But it's not just that they had fewer distractions. Their stillness was doing something. Neuroscientists have a name for what your brain does when it's not focused on a task: the default mode network. It's the system that activates during daydreaming, idle staring, doing nothing in particular. And it turns out this nothing is where some of the most important cognitive work happens: memory consolidation, emotional processing, long-term planning, creative connections between unrelated ideas. Studies on modern subjects have found that people who allow themselves unstructured, unstimulated time solve creative problems more effectively than people who stay constantly occupied. In other words, boredom, left alone, turns into thought, and thought, left alone, turns into insight. Ancient humans lived inside that process constantly because nothing was ever there to interrupt it. You, on average, check your phone every few minutes. Every check is a small demolition of whatever your default mode network was quietly building. You never let the thought finish. You never let the boredom become anything. You kill it in its crib, over and over, dozens of times a day, without ever noticing you're doing it. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. idle time around the fire wasn't just tolerated. Anthropological research on groups like the Zhuhawansi shows it was where culture itself was built. Unstructured hours were spent on stories, myths, jokes, half-formed ideas passed back and forth with no goal. Nobody was trying to be productive with that time. And out of that unproductive time came language, meaning, religion, art, the entire architecture of human culture, built inside the very silence you now find unbearable.
You don't get bored anymore, but you also don't get that. You've traded the discomfort of empty time for a mind that is never quiet enough to build anything in it. There's a psychological term for what your brain is doing right now. Reading this: continuous partial attention. You're never fully bored and never fully focused. You're hovering, always slightly stimulated, never deeply still. It's a state no ancient human ever lived in because it requires a constant external supply of novelty their world simply couldn't produce. So when you feel that itch, the one that sends your thumb to your phone the second a conversation lulls or a line at the store gets long, you're not weak, you're not broken. You're just the first humans in the history of the species to have that itch scratched every single time it appears. Your ancestors felt it too. Occasionally, they just had nothing to scratch it with, so it passed. And in passing, it became something else, a thought, an idea, a story, a moment of actual presence. If ancient humans never ran out of things to think about, with nothing to do, what did they actually think about? That's next.